And now, part two of the death of the dollar, how we got here and what you can do about it. Jerry?
Thank you, Jay. Well, yeah, we're continuing this brand new commentary, three-part series called The Death of the Dollar. We're basing on a brand new DVD. We've just put it out on our store called The Death of the Dollar, How We Got Here and What You Can Do About It. Obviously, we go into great detail in this one-hour DVD. But let's talk about number two. We talked about last week the very first reason why we believe that the dollar is going to be basically doomed over the next several years and even next couple of decades. First reason, obviously, was the loss of the purchasing power. This is because they continue to print it. The M3 money supply, as we talked about last week, basically is increasing at a rapid rate, and the Federal Reserve is doing nothing to slow it down. Well, this week we're going to look at the number two reason why we believe the dollar is doomed, and that is the U.S. government's lack of a strong dollar policy. You know, it's almost become a joke every time the U.S. Treasury Department head comes out and speaks, and he's asked by a reporter, what is our stance on the U.S. dollar being weak and obviously falling? And almost like a parrot, the Treasury Department head will always say, well, we have a strong U.S. dollar policy. It's almost a complete joke because while the words seem like they mean something, they're not backed up by anything. In fact, the U.S. Treasury has done nothing to protect the U.S. dollar. In 2008, we had a liquidity crisis, and it began to fully rock America and the global financial markets. And in response to this crisis, global central bankers all over the world decided to treat the crisis by printing more money. And this is known in the economic world as, you hear it in the newspaper and in the media, as quantitative easing, or they'll also say liquidity injections, or they're injecting liquidity. Basically, this means they're printing money. And in an effort to delay the inevitable pain from this, what we've seen by all types of central banks around the world is they have come galloping to the rescue of the fragile global economy with interest rate cuts and massive cash infusions. Now, this credit crisis that we're currently living through right now, affecting the globe, has exposed the reckless lending standards and lending practices and crafty financial engineering, which has led to our current speculative mania. And unfortunately, all of these liquidity injections and printing of money are a short-term solution to a very long-term structural problem. Now, back in 2007 and 2008, the U.S. subprime crisis, which turned into a global contagion, should have served as a wake-up call to the world's bankers and global politicians who had allowed the global fiat systems to spin out of control. You know, the U.S. financial system has been built upon a faulty fiat currency system, a dollar that is not backed up by anything. And we couple this with very poor fiscal stewardship. And what we find is that the United States is simply a house of cards, and this house of cards will come crashing down as soon as the population awakens to the hard realities that have been brought on by the financial excesses of the American lifestyle. The truth is simply this: the dollar itself is worthless paper. It is printed at will. The only thing that gives it value is faith in the scarcity that the government promises to keep the dollar in. It promises that it'll keep the dollar scarce. But the truth of the matter is it's not doing that. No one is working in Washington or in the Federal Reserve to keep the dollar in limited supply. So we move to an idea called the Greenspan Doctrine. We saw a move over the last several decades to reinflate through easy monetary policy every time we saw a negative economic event. And this became known as the Greenspan Doctrine. During the tenure as Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan had a response to financial crisis after financial crisis, and it was always one thing: to inflate his way out of them. Let's take a look. In the stock market crash of 1987, Alan Greenspan enters office as the Federal Reserve Chair, and he's faced with an immense crisis in the stock market. The 87 stock market crash, if you remember that, was a major event, and Greenspan responded by inflating the monetary base, and then basically by cutting rates. During 1994, the Mexican peso crisis, also known as the tequila hangover, Greenspan chose to deal with this by cutting rates. After the 1997 Asian crisis and the long-term capital management debacle, Greenspan chose to cut rates. Then, during the 1998 Russian ruble crisis that's basically was threatening to affect the American economy in a major way, Greenspan ran to the rescue, and by doing so, he did cut rates. And then, of course, we had the wake of the dot-com crash in March of 2000. Greenspan cut rates in response to that. After September 11th, 2001, Greenspan saw that we had a brand new challenge on our hands with global terrorism, and he saw the economy was teetering on the edge of collapse. So what did he do? He cut rates. And then beginning in June of 2003, key interest rates were cut to lower than 1% for the entire year as Greenspan saw that we were entering a recession. Of course, Ben Bernanke came into office not too much later, and we found that little has changed. Ben Bernanke, of course, the new Federal Reserve Chair, has decided to maintain the Greenspan doctrine, and in doing so, he has basically cut rates and printed money to deal with our economic crisis. For the last several years, it has been my mantra that interest rates should be raised and the monetary supply should be tightened to prevent widespread inflation. If we continue to lower interest rates and leave them at low levels, and if we continue to engage in the moral hazard of bailouts for U.S. corporations, as the U.S. has shown a great disregard for its stated strong dollar policy, we're going to find ourselves in a place that is very, very negative, even worse than what it is now. Instead of trying to save the fragile currency, the United States government has chosen to allow the dollar to be devalued by allowing the Federal Reserve to exercise extremely poor monetary policies regarding the dollar. Now, the dollar continues to enjoy the status of global economic hegemonic power with the key global reserve currency. But our current economic arrangement is completely unsustainable. I fully anticipated the global central bank coordination to reinflate their way out of the global credit crunch, and that's exactly what we have seen. Now, what we see now is that basically the central banks are trying to contain the credit crisis, but this will only be a temporary fix, and it will only serve to delay and enlarge the scope of the impending day of reckoning for the United States. So as we see, the United States dollar again has been basically devalued to a very loose policy, not a strong dollar policy on the part of the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve has tried to print its way out of this crisis, Jay.
Hey, Jerry, they can't leave those rates low forever, can they? When do you think they're going to raise them?
Our best projection on when the Federal Reserve is actually going to raise rates, although they should have raised them a year ago, in our estimation, we believe that they're actually going to raise rates beginning in late 2010 or early 2011. And this is obviously going to cause problems because when the Federal Reserve does, in fact, increase interest rates, we're going to have some pain. As Thomas Honig from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, the president, had stated, basically we have to go through some pain to deal with this crisis. And this has been the reason why the Federal Reserve has left them low. We don't want to have any pain. When the interest rates are raised, it's going to cause economic pain. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the consumer responds to this because we have many adjustable rate debt, we have much credit card debt, we have much adjustable rate mortgage debt. All of these will be affected by an increase in interest rates. And one thing we like to say also is the fact that these really are the good old days. Look at the economic crisis all around us. Look at the stock market. Look at some of the different things that we've seen, unemployment at record levels as of late. We see all of these things happening, and we literally say, Jay, these are the good old days. These will be referred to as the good old days, and let me explain why. Number one, we have low inflation right now. No one's really complaining about inflation. Gas doesn't cost $8 a gallon. Milk's not $8 a gallon. Inflation seems pretty tame considering how much money's been put into the money supply.
Right.
We have low tax rates. Believe it or not, we're at a historical low tax rate on the top marginal tax rate here in America. Tax rates can go much, much higher. If we go back to the 1960s, we find in 1940s, we find that tax rates are off the chart during the wars. Basically, the United States government basically had to raise rates to pay for things. We don't do that anymore. Now we try to find creative ways through borrowing or through printing. So tax rates can go much, much higher. They're relatively and even historically low right now. Interest rates are historically low. Oil prices right now are not causing any much concern. Gas is still less than $3 a gallon, not too bad. And we still have people who are willing to loan us money for all of our debt. These are literally the good old days. What happens when inflation goes sky high? What happens when tax rates go back to the post-World War II era? What happens when oil prices soar high because of peak oil? What happens when borrowers say, no more, we're not going to loan money to the United States government because they're bankrupt? What will we call that then? What will that look like then? What will it look like when these things turn all out of our favor? So it's very difficult as we look ahead, but that's where we are, and we'll continue next week with our commentary, Jay.
All right, Jerry. Well, you gave me a great analogy earlier when we were talking about this, about a balloon. And looks like what they can do is either let the air out slowly right now, or they can just pop it later.
Absolutely.
Thing is, if you pop it, you can't refill it.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. All right, well, folks, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, be sure to order Jerry's brand new DVD entitled The Death of the Dollar, How We Got Here and What You Can Do About It. Available on our website at www.jrmi.org, or place your order by phone at 918-827-5764. That's 918-827-JRMI. And be sure to tune in next week for Part 3 of Jerry's commentary on the death of the dollar, in which he offers the third reason why the U.S. dollar will remain in trouble for many years to come.